For 3 days we'd been trekking across this goddamn snowy ridge. The air was so cold it felt like my lungs would burst, and every step was like lifting a ton of rocks. Our job? Find out what piece of crap was killing people out here. The contract, as usual, came from somewhere high up, from a so-called private individual who was worried about his people at a remote research station. Nothing unusual on the face of it. People die in the middle of nowhere. But the description of the problem was murky. Something was attacking. There were strange tracks. And the victims? Their insides were like they'd exploded. Yet there were no signs of a struggle. No logic. Unlike a bear or wolf attack. The client, of course, was throwing cash around and demanded complete silence. He really didn't want a fuss. There are 4 of us. I'm the one in charge, the fixer. Walter's our medic, an ex-military guy who's seen more shit than I have. Janice is our tracks and wildlife specialist. She knows Alaska like the back of her hand. Then there are the young but sharp ones, Kyle and Aaron. They handle comms and all our technical junk. We're not rookies and we've seen it all. Rogue bears, wolves, and even crazy hermits. But here, from the very first day, something was hanging in the air. A strange tension. I felt it on my skin. Something here was wrong. Goosebumps crawled up my spine. The helicopter dropped us 20 miles from the station, just as the client requested. No extra eyes, no noise. We had everything to survive in this hell. Tents, sleeping bags, a week's worth of food, satellite comms, navigators, and of course, our weapons. Walter lugged his medical bag, stuffed with meds. Janice immediately got down to the snow, looking for any clues. Kyle and Aaron tinkered with the radio and heaters. As for me, I just tried to keep everything running like clockwork. The first 2 days were relatively calm. We followed the route, checking the maps the client gave us. We saw deer, rabbits, and a wolverine darted past once. Nothing that would spook seasoned hunters. But Janice, she kept finding it. Strange imprints in the snow. Larger than a bear's with gruesome claws. But the paw itself was wrong. Elongated, as if it had been turned inside out. She photographed them, sketched them, but couldn't figure out what they were. Either it's a creature mutated beyond recognition, or someone's trying very cleverly to confuse us, she muttered. But we knew that in this wild, remote place, where there wasn't a soul for hundreds of miles but us, there could be no pranksters. On the evening of the second day, we set up camp right at the base of the cliffs. And that's when things started. The wind howled, snow came down in sheets, and visibility dropped to 0. We quickly scarfed down some rations and dove into our sleeping bags. I woke up a few times from the wind tearing at the tent. Then, around 3 in the morning, Walter nudged me. He was sitting by the entrance, tense, listening. "Did you hear anything strange?" he whispered. I hushed. Through the roar of the blizzard, some kind of sound was breaking through. A moan, maybe a guttural growl. Horrible, wrong, unlike anything I'd ever heard from an animal. It sent a chill down my spine. We woke the others. Janice was already sitting up, wide-eyed. She'd heard it too. We turned off the headlamps. We sat in the pitch black, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound seemed to drift down from above, right from the cliffs shrouded in a snowy veil. In the morning the wind had calmed a little, but the snow kept falling and falling. All the terrifying tracks Janice had found yesterday were now buried under a white blanket. We decided not to venture up until the weather gave us the all clear. Kyle tried to contact the station, but the satellite connection was barely breathing. Only snatches of phrases got through. They seemed to hear us and promised to tinker with the signal. After breakfast, Janice grabbed her rifle without a second thought and went to scout the area, toward the cliffs. About an hour later she returned, pale as death and scared stiff. Up there! Up there! Janice barely forced the words out. I saw something. She told us how she was climbing the rocky slope when she heard that same strange sound from the night before, only this time it was much closer, right near her ear. She immediately hid behind a huge boulder and started observing. According to her, she saw something tall and dark gliding between the rocks. The figure was terrifyingly strange, unnaturally disproportionate, long arms, a hunched back. You get the picture. Utter horror. And it moved quickly and completely silently, like a ghost, despite the deep snow. She couldn't clearly make out a face, just a complete shadow, as if evil itself had arrived. After a few minutes, the thing just vanished into thin air. After that story, it was obvious. We were definitely not dealing with a bear or a wolf. This was something else, not of this world. And this creature was nearby. The decision made itself. We needed to get to the station immediately. Huddle up and haul ass. That was the plan. We quickly broke camp, chambered rounds, and started the climb up the mountain. Snow up to our waists, every step a struggle. We had to move slowly and carefully. Janice, completely on edge, led the way, meticulously checking every corner. Walter and the others followed, ready to provide cover at any moment. I trailed at the rear, eyes glued to our six. The feeling of anxiety never left me for a minute, the goosebumps constant. It felt like someone or something was watching us from behind the snowy cliffs, breathing down our necks. We moved uphill for several hours, and the climb turned out to be pure hell, tougher than I expected. The snow lay in deep drifts, hiding slippery rocks and treacherous ice underneath. Every step demanded total focus. The wind didn't let up. It howled, slicing through all our thermal layers, chilling us to the bone. We walked in silence, teeth gritted, conserving energy. Janice, a true leader, went first, choosing the safest path. Her eyes scanned the slopes above us, searching for the slightest movement, any shadow. Walter, our rear guard, brought up the rear. His job was to watch our backs and be ready to help if one of us slipped or got hurt. I was in the middle, maintaining visual contact with everyone and periodically checking the navigator. Kyle and Aaron, though carrying the heaviest gear, held up well, but it was clear they were at their limit. That's what professionalism means. No whining, just doing your job, even when every muscle aches. Midday, we stopped for a quick snack under a rock overhang. Hot tea from thermoses and an energy bar each. Visibility had improved slightly, and we could make out the opposite side of the gorge through breaks in the clouds. The silence was so profound it made our ears ring. Only the wind was howling. Nothing new, Janice said, wiping snow from her goggles. The old tracks are completely covered, so the thing either left or is lying in wait somewhere here, on the mountain. Still no comms, Kyle reported, putting away the satellite phone. Complete silence. And then it became clear to everyone. Either their equipment was fried or, well, you get the picture. There was no one left to answer. We didn't linger. The cold was biting to the bone and sitting still was dangerous. We continued the climb. After another hour of walking, the slope became a little more forgiving. We reached a small plateau that offered a view of the entire valley. And there, about 2 miles from us, we finally saw it. The research station. It looked exactly like the schematics the client gave us. A few modular buildings connected by covered walkways, a large communications antenna, and a meteorological tower, but there was no light or smoke coming from the station. Dead. Just dead against the backdrop of this snowy wilderness. This wasn't just a bad sign. It was a scream of terror. Even when no one's around, the exterior lighting and heating are always on. We descended from the plateau and headed toward the station across the flat ground. The walking was easier now, but the psychological tension grew with every step, tightening my chest. We were walking right into the mouth of the unknown. About half a mile from the station, we stopped. I pulled out my binoculars and began to carefully scan the perimeter. No one, no vehicles, no movement. The snow around the station was pristine except for a pair of old snowmobile tracks that were almost buried. "Something's not right here," Walter muttered, looking at the research complex through his binoculars. The main metal door was bowed outwards, hinges ripped off, the frame deformed. Humans couldn't have done that. We switched to combat readiness. Janice, our explosives expert, noted that a reinforced ground floor window was blown out, shards scattered. We circled the building. There was no other damage, just the horrifically bowed main door, torn like a tin can. A blast of icy air wafted from the opening, smelling of ozone and something alien. Inside, pitch darkness and deadly silence. "We have to go in," I said. Kyle and Aaron stayed to cover the perimeter. Walter, Janice, and I went inside. Every 5 minutes, a radio check. If 10 minutes of silence, they evacuate. We found the technical entrance with an electronic lock. My keycard worked. The door opened. Inside, icy, stale air, smelling of dust and pungent ozone. The emergency lights weren't working. We switched on our headlamps. The floor was covered in dust and frost, on which Janice spotted tracks. Ordinary boot prints from the staff, lightly dusted, and on top of them, elongated tracks with deep claw furrows like the ones we saw in the mountains. They led to the forced main door. We cautiously moved through the corridors. Everywhere was a mess, abandoned mugs, overturned chairs, scattered papers. Everything suggested a panicked flight. In the senior scientist's office, about 7 feet up, there were deep scratches on the metal panels, 3 parallel furrows that had cut through the metal. "Only a predator with incredible strength could do that," Janice whispered. The mess hall with unfinished plates, the smashed laboratory, the living quarters with personal items abandoned. The same scene everywhere. But there were no people. Not alive, not dead, no blood, nothing. Where did they go? In the comms room, equipment was humming, but screens displayed errors. Connection lost. Security systems disabled. Unauthorized intrusion. The last entry in the duty log, written 3 days ago in shaky handwriting. "It's inside. We're locked in. It hunts. Don't open the door. Don't." The text broke off. Returning to the main door, I noticed spent casings scattered across the floor. A mix of 12-gauge shotgun shells and 9mm pistol rounds. There had been a fierce, unequal fight here, which, judging by the absence of bodies and the scale of the destruction, was lost. There was no trace of the defenders. The door was riddled with bullets, but the shots were clearly fired not from outside but from the inside. Those who were here weren't just trying to escape. No, they were desperately fighting to keep something locked up, to prevent it from getting out. And judging by the mangled metal, they failed. We returned to the service entrance. I quickly radioed Kyle. "We're inside, station's dead, nobody here. But there was clearly a fight, and whatever we're looking for left its tracks. Both of you come in. Bring the gear to the comms room. We'll make that our HQ. The main door is a sieve. We need to block it." A few minutes later, Kyle and Aaron entered the gloom, heavily dragging backpacks and cases with our equipment. Their eyes adjusted to the darkness, sliding over the scratches on the walls and the tracks on the floor we pointed out. No one asked questions. What was the point? Everyone understood. The situation was much more serious than it seemed. Our job wasn't just to track down some dangerous animal. No, we had to unravel the mystery of what happened at this damned lost facility, where someone before us had tried to fight and failed miserably. We hauled everything into the comms room. It was in the very heart of the building, windowless with a single entrance, the safest place. While Kyle and Aaron worked on their gear, Walter and I tackled the main door. Ripped wide open, it was a real headache. Leaving it ajar, especially overnight, would be insane. We found some huge metal shelving units in a storage room. The four of us, grunting and swearing, barely managed to drag them to the opening and barricade it. This was, of course, a temporary solution. Whatever could bow a steel door wasn't likely to be stopped by a pile of shelves, but it gave us some ghostly sense of control over the perimeter. After that, Janice went on a second, more thorough inspection. She peered into every crack, into the ventilation shafts, under every desk, just to be absolutely certain that there was no one inside. And nothing. Half an hour later she returned, her voice calm, but her eyes spoke volumes. "The station is empty." We gathered in the comms room. Kyle had already connected our portable generator to one of the consoles. A few minutes of suspense, and an image flashed on the screen, the logo of the station's owning company, and then the system menu. "Main power's down," Kyle announced, tapping the keyboard. "Looks like an emergency shutdown. The backup batteries died. I can power this console and maybe the local server. No access to external systems. The antenna's dead. But we can try to pull internal logs and camera footage." "That's our top priority now," I said. "We need to understand what the hell we're dealing with. Walter, check the medical bay. Maybe there are some records or, God forbid, samples left. Janice, go over the building plans again. Look for any strange rooms, basements, utility floors, anything we might have missed." The team dispersed, each getting to work. The atmosphere was professional, focused. We're professionals, and panic isn't our method. We analyze, plan, act. But beneath the exterior calm, I felt a chilling anxiety building inside. Scratches on the metal, the ripped door, the casings on the floor. It all added up to a deeply unsettling picture. An hour later, Kyle called us over. "Got it. I accessed the security system archive. Footage for the last few weeks, but most files are corrupted. Probably due to the power surge during the shutdown. I'm running recovery, but it'll take time. However, one fragment from the main corridor camera seems intact. Recorded 3 days ago, around the same time as the log entry." We crowded around the monitor. Kyle brought the image up on the screen, black and white, grainy picture from the ceiling surveillance camera in the corridor. The quality was poor, but everything was clear enough. The corridor was empty. The date and time flickered in the corner of the screen. "I'll fast forward to the moment of activity," Kyle said. He moved the time slider. The image on the screen began to move. And then we saw a man in a lab coat practically fly out of one of the rooms. He was in sheer panic, his eyes darting around as if all the devils of hell were after him. And yes, they were being chased. 2 more followed. One had a shotgun, not the usual lab equipment, right? They were yelling something, but the sound, damn it, wasn't recorded for some reason. The 3 of them were backing toward the main exit, the one we had barricaded. The guy with the shotgun fired several times down the corridor where they'd come from, and then it emerged from the doorway's darkness. What we saw on the screen didn't fit any classification I'd ever encountered, and it certainly didn't resemble any animal. It was horrifyingly tall, taller than any man, and moved on 2 legs. But its gait, it was broken, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by strings. The body was thin, almost skeletal, yet it radiated an unreal, animalistic power. Its extremely long arms, which hung almost to its knees, ended not in hands, but in something like huge claws, or God help me, scythes. The head was hard to make out clearly due to the poor recording quality, but it seemed elongated and completely featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. It didn't run, but moved with quick, jerky steps, closing the distance at a terrifying speed. The man with the shotgun fired 1 more time, almost point blank. The blast hit the creature right in the chest, but it had absolutely no visible effect. It didn't even slow down. With one swift movement of its long arm, it simply batted the man aside. He hit the wall with a dull thud and didn't move again. The other two employees, stunned with terror, frantically tried to open the heavy entrance door. The creature caught up to them. The recording, unfortunately, didn't show the details. The camera was too high. But we only saw sharp, furious movements, after which the people simply collapsed to the floor. Then the thing turned to the door. It didn't even try to open it. It just started leaning its full weight against it, hitting it. The screen clearly showed the metal beginning to deform under its pressure, as if it weren't a reinforced door, but a cardboard box. At some point, the creature took a few steps back and then struck the center of the door with immense force. The metal couldn't withstand it, tore open, and the door flew outward. The creature left the building and moved out of the camera's view. The recording continued for a few more minutes, showing the empty corridor with bodies on the floor, and then the screen simply went dark. That was likely the moment the emergency power shut down. We were silent for a few minutes, trying to process what we'd seen. It was simply unthinkable. "What in God's name is that thing?" Walter finally choked out, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Janice replied. Her voice was quiet but surprisingly firm. "It doesn't fit any known biological classification. Body structure, locomotion, resistance to damage. This is something else entirely." Kyle looked at the console again. "While we were watching the footage, one more small file recovered," he said. "It's not video. It's an audio recording from the medical bay. Looks like a voice recorder was on." He pressed the playback button. A man's voice, broken by static, came through the speakers. It was a report, apparently dictated by the local doctor. "Sample number 3 is exhibiting uncontrolled aggression. Attempts at sedation have failed. Cellular regeneration exceeds all calculations. Containment breach has occurred. It broke through the chamber wall." The recording cut off with screams and sounds of struggle, followed by a dead silence. We exchanged glances. The picture was coming together, and it was horrifying. This creature hadn't come from outside. It was here, at the station. It hadn't just been discovered, it was being studied. And at some point, the experiment had gone out of control. This changed everything. We came to hunt a wild animal and ended up at a facility where some kind of biological catastrophe had occurred. Damn it. And that wasn't even the most disturbing part. The most disturbing thing was the question I saw in each of our eyes. If the specimen was number 3, then where were number 1 and number 2? The silence in the comms room became so thick you could cut it with a knife. The question hanging in the air changed everything. We weren't hunters tracking an anomalous predator anymore. We were a cleanup crew inside the territory of a failed black project. Our contract didn't cover this. The client who hired us clearly withheld key details. He sent us here knowing that this wasn't just a wild animal, but the product of an experiment. We need to find the medical bay and the lab this crap broke out of. I broke the oppressive silence. We need every scrap of information we can get. What the hell is it? How did it get here? And most importantly, how many of them are there? Kyle, keep digging through the server. Look for any mention of the project, reports, personal journals, anything that sheds light on Specimen 1 and Specimen 2. I turned to Janice. The station maps should show a science or laboratory block. Those areas are usually isolated, remember? Janice had already spread the massive station plan on the table. Her finger slid across it. Aha, here it is. West Wing, marked as Biomedical Research Restricted Access Zone. separated from the rest of the station by a sluice corridor with airlock doors. According to the plan, there are several labs and 3 areas labeled as containment chambers. That's where we'll find the answers, Walter confirmed grimly, checking the contents of his medical bag. His movements were eerily calm and methodical, as if he had long prepared for the worst, or for what we were about to see. The recording showed 3 people, but there were 12 people working here. Where were the other 9? That question plunged us back into a chilling silence. We hadn't found a single body during the initial sweep. It was completely illogical. If the creature had staged a massacre here, there should have been some traces left. But besides the 3 on the video, the station was empty. A decision was made. We were moving out to the West Wing. Aaron stayed in the comms room to coordinate us and monitor the server. Walter, Janice, and I went on reconnaissance. We moved slowly, step by step, as if sweeping hostile territory. Weapons ready, flashlights carving out every corner from the darkness. The station corridors, which had seemed merely abandoned an hour ago, now felt like part of a massive, deadly trap. We passed the mess hall and the living quarters, heading for the airlock to the laboratory block. And that's when we stumbled upon something we hadn't noticed before. In one of the living quarters, right in the middle of the floor, was a large, dark, partially frozen puddle. Walter knelt and shone his light on it. It was blood, but there was no body nearby, nor any signs of a struggle. Just a pool of blood, and from it, a damp streak led directly to a ventilation grate in the wall, as if something wet and heavy had been dragged across the floor. We looked at the grate. Several screws fastening it to the wall had been torn out. The vent opening itself was dark and narrow. A person definitely wouldn't fit. It was taking the bodies, Janice said quietly, almost a whisper. Not just killing, but dragging them away. This thought was far more terrifying than a simple massacre. It spoke of some horrific, purposeful behavior. Was the creature covering its tracks, or storing supplies? Neither option boded well. We finally reached the airlock corridor. The massive airlock door with a manual hand wheel was tightly locked. A red light was blinking on the wall next to it, a clear sign of quarantine or emergency lockdown. "Kyle, can you hear me?" I asked over the radio. "I hear you, Aaron's on the line. Kyle's working," her voice came back. "We're at the entrance to the laboratory block. The door is locked. Can you try to lift the lockdown from the terminal?" Several agonizing minutes passed. "Kyle says the security system for this wing is completely autonomous. He can't access it from the central server. It has to be opened manually from here." On the panel next to the door was a keypad for entering a code and a slot for a keycard. Our universal key didn't work. The system required some kind of additional authorization. Walter examined the panel. "We could try to crack it and short the contacts, but it might take time and make a lot of noise," he said. "Let's try another way," Janice said, pointing to the manual hand wheel. "Emergency open. That should work independently of the electronics." Walter and I leaned on the wheel together. It turned with tremendous difficulty, creaking, covered in rust and frost. Every turn was accompanied by a loud grating sound that echoed through the empty corridors. We felt like the noise could be heard for miles around, attracting something. After several long, painful minutes of heavy work, the lock finally clicked, and the heavy door hissed as if alive and slid open just a crack. We squeezed through the narrow gap and immediately realized this wasn't just another station compartment. This was the laboratory. The walls here were lined with strange white panels, eerily smooth. The light, though running on emergency power, was brighter than usual, and the air was even colder, carrying a thin, nasty smell, a mix of a pharmacy and something organic, like living, yet dead. This looked like true hell. Tables were overturned, test tubes smashed to pieces, and equipment was ground to pulp. Papers lay scattered across the floor, mixed with shards of glass. And the most gruesome thing, horrific brown stains. On the walls, on the floor. Stains the color of dried blood. And then we found them. What were once people. 2, in white coats, lay in one of the labs. Walter approached but immediately backed away. "Don't get close," he choked out. "I don't know how safe this is, but one thing I can tell you. They weren't just killed, they were ripped open, savagely, without any surgical finesse." We didn't linger. Something else awaited us. Our target was at the very end of the corridor. 3 containment chambers. The doors were even more massive than the armored behemoth we had just entered. Above each hung a plaque. Specimen 01, Specimen 022, Specimen 03. The door to chamber number 3, it looked like it had been ripped out from the inside. The metal wasn't just bent, it was torn to shreds like paper. Inside, a small room with bare, reinforced concrete walls covered in deep, ugly scratches. Shreds of what looked like restraints lay on the floor, used apparently to tie something down. Yes, this was definitely the lair of the creature we saw on the recording. Then we turned our gaze to the other 2 doors. Chamber number 2 was shut and locked. Not a single scratch on the outside. But the small armored glass viewport was broken. Not from the outside, but from the inside. The entire inner surface of the glass was covered in a network of cracks radiating from a single point. It was dark inside the chamber, but when Walter shone his light in, we saw. It was absolutely empty. The walls inside were also scored end to end with scratches. And finally, chamber number 1. This was the one that made us stop dead in our tracks. The door wasn't locked. It was simply standing ajar by a couple of inches. No signs of a breach, no damage. It had been opened as intended by the button via the electronic system. Right in front of the door, on the floor, lay a tablet. Janice picked it up. The screen was cracked, but the device powered on. A text file was open on it. Only a few words, but they overturned everything. Specimen 01 is unstable. Decision made for preemptive elimination. Object released outside the station perimeter. Further tracking impossible due to weather conditions. We stood in complete silence, staring at that slightly ajar door. The creature we were tracking, the one that had wiped out the entire station personnel, was specimen number 3. Specimen number 2 apparently had either died or simply vanished from its locked chamber. And specimen number 1, it had been released outside intentionally, and no one knew where it was now. Maybe it was still roaming somewhere in those snowy mountains, or maybe it was far smarter and more dangerous than the others. Maybe it wasn't just roaming. Maybe it was waiting. We stood in the sterile corridor of the laboratory block, and the cold chilled us to the bone, seemingly not just from the outside but from within. The information on the tablet turned everything upside down. Our enemy wasn't alone, and one of them wasn't just a beast that had broken free from a cage. This was a monster so terrifying that these smart guys just dumped it out into the cold. Out of sight, out of mind. A decision driven either by complete despair or incredible criminal negligence. "We're going back to the comms room." My voice sounded alien, cracked. "Immediately, we take everything Kyle managed to download and we get the hell out of here. The hunt is over." This is a freaking evacuation now. We were no longer hunters. Now we were being hunted from 2 different sides, and both threats were entirely different, and both were lethal. Walter and Janice nodded silently. We moved back, trying to tread exactly in our own footprints, as if that could change anything. The grinding of that emergency behemoth as we closed it now seemed not just noise, but a signal that might attract someone who didn't really want to see us. Every step down the main corridor of the station was different now. We were no longer looking at, but staring into the darkness, expecting anything. The darkness wasn't just swallowing doorways, it was pulling upward, toward the ventilation grate. The thought that the dead personnel had simply been dragged away into those black shafts haunted us. What was it? Just a way to hide a meal? Or something far, far worse? When we returned to the comms room, Erin was sitting in front of the monitor, her face illuminated by the pale, ghostly screen light. Kyle was beside her, completely on edge, fiddling with a cable like a string of prayer beads. "There's something else," Erin whispered, not taking her eyes off the monitor. "I found fragments of Dr. Alan Kane's personal journal. He seems to have been the project lead here. Most of the entries are corrupted, but the latest ones, they're readable." She pulled up the text file, and we all crowded behind her like zombies as Erin began to read, relaying the chilling essence of the doctor's final entries. At first, about 3 weeks ago, Kane wrote that specimen of 3 was behaving as expected, aggressive, physically growing, but minimally intelligent, everything under control. A week later, he noted that specimen R2 stood out. It showed unexpected cunning, managing to hack its food dispenser. Even then, one of the employees grew worried, but Kane waved it off. "Come on, too early to panic." But the real horror started with specimen number 1. 10 days ago, the doctor was already panicking. This specimen was causing serious concern. Its development had gone completely off plan. Physically, it was weaker than the others, but its ability to mimicry, it was mind-blowing. Kane wrote that it didn't just copy sounds, it reproduced complex behavioral patterns. The journal explicitly stated, "Yesterday during the test, it perfectly mimicked my cough and then said my name, in Walter's voice. We immediately ceased all sound contact with it." The next entry, made 4 days ago, reported the death of specimen number 2. It was found dead in its chamber from massive internal hemorrhage, without a single scratch on the outside, as if its own biology had consumed it. The final entry, just 3 days ago, described a true catastrophe. The doctor wrote that specimen number 1 had escaped. It hadn't broken out by force, no. It deceived the system, mimicking the voice access code, and simply walked out of its chamber. Kane confessed that they had made a terrible mistake, underestimating its intelligence. It turned out the whole preemptive elimination story was a fake, intended to cover up the scale of their complete failure. The journal ended with chilling words. "We've locked ourselves in the block. AO3 has started rampaging. I can hear it tearing down its door. This is the end." And that was it. The journal abruptly stopped. Now everything fell into its dreadful place. Specimen number 3, the monster from the recording, was just brute force, a predictable predator. But the real threat, the one that made our hair stand on end, was specimen number 1, smart, cunning, and capable of imitation like the devil. And it had been free for several days already. It wasn't just released, it escaped itself, outsmarting its own creators. "Gear up," my voice was firm without a hint of doubt. "Kyle, everything you have onto the secure drive, and fast. Erin, get the gear ready for departure. Walter, Janice, with me. We're dismantling the barricade. We're leaving through the technical entrance immediately." No one uttered a word. We worked as one, efficiently, smoothly. In a couple of minutes, Kyle dumped all the recovered data. We quickly dismantled our makeshift shelter so as not to leave traces of our escape. We crept through the building like shadows, ghosts in this dead, frozen tomb. I took one last look at the main corridor. The bodies we saw in the recording still lay there, dusted with fine, icy powder. No one had come for them. We slipped out through the technical entrance, directly into the gathering dusk. The snow had quieted and the first stars were appearing in the sky, cold and distant. The air was frigid, almost ringing. The 4 of us stood on the untrodden snow, a few steps from the station's concrete wall. The feeling was like having just surfaced from bottomless black water, gasping for air after a long dive. Just as we were about to bolt for the extraction point, Janice suddenly froze, as if nailed to the spot. Her gaze was fixed not on the mountains where we expected specimen number 3 to appear, but right at her own feet. "Wait a minute," she whispered, her voice laced with pure horror. "Look!" We lowered our eyes as one. And there, on the fresh, untrodden snow, where our feet had just stepped, was a chain of someone's tracks, and they were clearly not ours. Forget blurred traces of local fauna. No, these were perfect, eerily sharp imprints of human boots, exactly like ours. Every curve of the sole, every tread pattern, even the small scratches familiar on our footwear after walking on rocky terrain, everything was reproduced with frightening accuracy. The same size, the same characteristic Armageddon pattern. Identical. Even the tiniest grains of sand pressed out from under the tread were lying exactly as they would have from our own steps. These were our tracks, but left not by us, but by someone who seemed to have copied our identity down to the smallest detail, to its very essence. The chain, no more than a dozen steps, led directly to the station wall, from which we had just emerged. The tracks began about 5 meters from the airlock, rounded the corner of the steel frame, and simply vanished into thin air, as if their owner had stepped into an invisible door or evaporated. No scratches on the wall, no drag marks, no signs of jumping or falling. They just ended, as if an invisible observer standing there moments ago had disappeared without a trace, leaving only this dreadful imprint of its presence. We froze. All 4 of us. I, Walter, Janice, and Aaron. We stood rooted to the spot, our respirators quietly hissing, counting the seconds of our mounting panic. We just came out, barely a minute or 2 ago, without time to look around, without even taking 10 steps from the airlock. And these tracks? They were brand new. The edges of the imprints were sharp, untouched even by the slightest gust of wind, which never completely subsided here. Fine dust particles raised with each step hadn't yet settled, faintly shimmering in the light of our headlamps. They had been left literally a couple of minutes ago, while we were still inside behind the sealed door, completely confident that we were alone on this dead planet. It meant someone was standing right here, against the wall, right next to our shelter, watching the station, watching our silhouettes, watching us. Every movement, every rustle, every flicker of light from the portholes. And damn it, wearing the exact same boots as us, identical down to the last scratch. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a demonstration, a challenge, a terrifying message left right on our doorstep saying, "I am here, I know you, and I can be you." I slowly raised my gaze. In the cold, dead light of dusk, their faces suddenly seemed alien, unfamiliar. The shadows from their helmets distorted their features, turning them into grotesque masks. Their eyes, usually full of the fatigue of endless missions, were now wide with horror, flickering not just with disbelief, but with true all-consuming paranoia. I saw it in Walter's eyes, Janice's, Aaron's. They looked at each other, and each of us was asking the same question, not daring to voice it, afraid even to think it aloud. A question that was beginning to erode our unity from within. We had only been at the station for a couple of hours, arriving here on a capture mission, but specimen number 1 had been loose for several days. Almost 3 full days had passed since its escape. It had plenty of time to study us, what we looked like, what we wore, how we moved, what our habits were. It could have seen our faces through the portholes, heard our voices, studied the gear we used, and perhaps even our individual mannerisms. And, most importantly, chosen the perfect, terrifyingly plausible camouflage. Not just hiding in the shadows, but becoming one of us, blending in with us indistinguishably to strike from within. We showed up here to hunt a creature that, according to our intel, was merely a primitive predator, capable of brute force and instinctive reactions. We were confident in our role as hunters, in our technological superiority, in our ability to control the situation. But what if, all this time it was hunting us, remaining invisible, right under our noses, studying, mimicking, preparing for its far more sophisticated strike, which now seemed inevitable? Our confidence crumbled into dust, exposing a bone-chilling unknown and the realization that we might have just been pawns in its game. And now, looking at the three of them, at their frozen, fear-distorted faces, I couldn't shake one thought. A simple, maddeningly logical, but absolutely monstrous question that pulsed in my temples, drowning out everything else, like a funeral bell in an empty head. A question that made me feel as if I were standing on the edge of an abyss, with something breathing down my neck. But I couldn't turn around because I was afraid to see that it was already here, among us. A question that destroyed the last vestiges of sanity and trust. Did all of us actually leave the station?